The silver fork trembled slightly in my hand as I sliced through the roast chicken. The smell of rosemary and butter filled the air, but all I could taste was tension. It had been years since I sat at this table. Same polished oak, same chandelier, same polite cruelty. Dad cleared his throat like he was preparing to make a speech. Mom smiled her practiced hostess smile, the kind that hides exhaustion behind gloss. And across from me sat Dad's boss, Mr. Raymond Hensley, a name that made everyone else at the table sit a little straighter. He was charming, wealthy, and apparently the kind of man my father wished I'd impress long ago. I didn't need to. Not anymore. Madison, Dad said, setting his wine glass down. So, what are you doing these days? Still consulting. His voice dripped with the kind of curiosity that was really condescension. I smiled softly. Something like that. My sister Haley snorted under her breath. Translation, still job hopping. Mom's eyes flicked toward her. Haley, she murmured, but the damage was done. Mr. Hensley looked between us with a polite smile. Consulting, you said? I replied, taking a sip of water. Policy-related work. He froze. Wait, Madison Blake. His brow furrowed, like his mind was connecting dots. Then, after a long pause, his voice rose slightly, filled with disbelief. Hold on, you're the senator? Silence fell like thunder. My father's fork slipped from his hand. Every eye at that table turned to me, and for once, they weren't seeing the failure they'd built in their heads. They were seeing power. Brief beat. And I just smiled. It's nice to finally meet you in person, Mr. Hensley. It's strange how a single dinner can haunt you for years. Because this wasn't the first time I'd been invisible at my father's table. I remember another night. I was 21, still in college, still believing I could make him proud. I'd just told my family I'd been accepted into a political science mentorship program in DC, a small opportunity, unpaid, but it meant everything to me. Dad laughed. Actually laughed. Politics, he said, shaking his head. You? Sweetheart, you don't even know how the real world works. Leave that to people who can afford to play pretend. Haley was scrolling on her phone.
Yeah, Mads.
You're not exactly the type to run for office. Mom tried to smile through the tension. Maybe it's just a phase, she offered, pouring more wine, as if drowning discomfort in Merlot would fix everything. I remember the heat in my cheeks, the lump in my throat that felt too big to swallow. I wanted to say something clever, something sharp, but all I managed was a whisper. I just thought I could make a difference. Dad leaned back, the sound of his chair scraping against the tile. You make a difference, he said, by being realistic. You're not cut out for leadership, Madison. You're too sensitive. Those words burrowed deep. Too sensitive. Too soft. Too naive. After dinner, I stood on the back porch, cold night air stinging my eyes, and that's when Grandma Rose found me. She always knew when I was breaking inside. She handed me her old fountain pen, a worn silver one with initials barely visible. It's yours now, she said softly. It's the pen your grandfather used to sign his first city ordinance. Remember this, Maddie. They'll call you soft until you prove that softness is strength. I clutched that pen so hard it left a mark on my palm. That was the night I decided to stop waiting for anyone's approval. I packed my things 2 weeks later and bought a one-way ticket to Washington, D.C., armed with nothing but Grandma's pen, a suitcase, and the certainty that if they wouldn't believe in me, I would. Beat, emotional pause. They said I was nothing, but I swore to make nothing mean something. Washington, D.C. didn't welcome me with open arms. It greeted me with gray skies, overpriced rent, and an unpaid internship that barely covered bus fare. I rented a room in a shared apartment, cracked walls, thin blankets, and a view of a brick alley. Every morning, I'd walk 10 blocks to a think tank downtown, clutching a secondhand leather bag and Grandma Rose's fountain pen in my coat pocket like a lucky charm. For the first few months, I felt invisible, filing reports, fetching coffee, writing policy notes that others took credit for. But each night I stayed late, studying how things worked. Legislation, campaign structures, the language of power. I learned something important. It's not the loudest voice that changes the world. It's the one that refuses to be silenced. Then came Eleanor Price, a senior policy director, elegant and sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who could make a room listen without raising her tone. She noticed my work. One night, as I was packing up, she stopped me and said, "You wrote that brief on urban development, didn't you?" I hesitated, expecting a reprimand. Instead, she smiled. "It was brilliant. You've got instinct. Don't waste it trying to impress the wrong people." That moment changed everything. Eleanor became my mentor, my compass. She taught me that strength wasn't about dominance, it was about clarity, about knowing who you are when no one believes in you. Years passed in a blur of long nights and small victories. I learned to write speeches that made people cry, to negotiate budgets that built schools, to listen to stories that others ignored. I remember one freezing winter night, sitting alone in my tiny apartment, hands trembling from exhaustion. My phone buzzed, a message from Haley. "Dad says you should stop pretending to be something you're not." I stared at it for a long moment, then closed the message. Instead of replying, I pulled out Grandma's pen and kept writing. That year, I earned my first salaried position as a legislative aide. By 30, I was chief of staff for one of the most respected senators in the state. And when Eleanor retired, she left behind a piece of advice that burned into my heart. If you ever get the chance to lead differently. Lead like a woman who remembers the tables she wasn't welcome at. I did. When I announced my own campaign, I didn't tell my family. Not out of spite, but because it was mine. Every fundraiser, every policy speech, every sleepless night, it belonged to me and to every girl who'd ever been told she was too much or not enough. By the time I took the oath of office, the crowd was roaring my name. And in that sea of faces, I thought of one dinner table far away, the one where they once told me I was nothing. Soft pause. If only they could see me now. Back to that dinner table, the one where everything changed. Mr. Hensley's voice still echoed in the air. "Wait, you're the senator?" The clink of silverware stopped. My father's hand hovered midair, his mouth slightly open. Haley's smirk melted away, replaced by confusion. Even Mom, who'd always managed to keep her composure, looked pale beneath her flawless makeup. I dabbed my mouth gently with a napkin, pretending the world hadn't just tilted on its axis. "I suppose the news travels slower here," I said softly. Mr. Hensley laughed, clearly delighted. "Well, I'll be damned. Senator Madison Blake, you were just sworn in last month, right?" I watched the speech on CSBN, brilliant work on the education reform bill. Dad blinked. The what?" "The reform bill," Mr. Hensley repeated, still beaming. "Your daughter's initiative is already being talked about nationwide. You didn't tell me your Madison was that Madison." My father's smile cracked, that same practiced, proud facade he wore at business dinners. "Oh, well, she likes to keep things private," he managed to say, his voice faltering. Haley stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Wait," she whispered. "You're actually in politics?" I leaned back in my chair, fingers lightly brushing the rim of my glass. "Public service," I said. "But yes, senator for the 9th District." Mom finally spoke, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second I saw the woman who used to tuck me in at night before she learned to stay quiet around Dad. "Because," I said gently, "you all made it very clear you didn't believe I could be anyone. And I didn't want to spend the rest of my life trying to prove otherwise." Silence. Even the hum of the refrigerator felt loud. Mr. Hensley broke it with a light chuckle. "Well, I think your family should be incredibly proud. You're doing extraordinary work, Senator." "Thank you," I said, nodding politely. "That means a lot." Dad jumped in, eager to reclaim control. "Of course we're proud," he said quickly. "We always knew she had potential. Didn't we, honey?" Mom hesitated. "Yes, always." I smiled, a soft, almost merciful smile.
"Funny," I said.
"That's not how I remember it." Haley fidgeted, pushing her food around her plate. "So, like, Do you actually work with people like the president now? I laughed quietly. Sometimes. Mr. Hensley leaned forward, impressed. Senator Blake, if I may, I'd love to discuss your infrastructure bill. I think my company could support some of those projects. Dad blinked, realizing his boss was now talking to me, not him. The power dynamic shifted right there at the table. It wasn't just about titles or money, it was about presence. For the first time, my father wasn't the center of gravity in his own house. I saw the panic flicker in his eyes. The calculation. The sudden urge to rewrite the story. So, he said too brightly, maybe we can all help each other out. You know, keep it in the family. I placed my napkin neatly beside my plate and looked straight at him. I appreciate the offer, Dad. But I already have everything I need. Mr. Hensley smiled approvingly. And that's exactly why she's a senator. Pause. Madison's inner monologue resumes. That night, as I watched their stunned faces, I realized something profound. I'd spent years chasing respect from people who were never capable of giving it. And now that I didn't need it, they finally saw me. They saw who I'd always been. The air at that dinner table had changed. It wasn't thick with judgment anymore. It was heavy with realization. Mr. Hensley excused himself politely, still buzzing about future collaborations. As he left, he gave me a warm handshake and said quietly, "You've got grace, Senator. The kind that can't be taught." When the front door closed, silence settled again, the kind that reveals what people really think. Dad cleared his throat. "You know, Maddie," he said, voice strained, "maybe we got off on the wrong foot all those years ago. But look at you now. You've made it. And maybe we could, I don't know, work together? I've got some business contacts that could—" "Dad." I said it softly, but he froze mid-sentence. "I don't need your contacts. Or your approval." His jaw tightened. Haley looked between us, awkward, then tried to lighten the tension. "You could at least help Dad's company, you know? Give something back." I turned toward her. "Help? I did offer help once. Remember? When you mocked me for interning for free." Her cheeks flushed. "That was years ago." "Yes," I said, nodding. "And it taught me who actually believed in me." I wasn't trying to be cruel, but truth has a way of cutting clean. Mom finally spoke, voice soft but trembling. "Madison, we just didn't understand. We thought you'd get hurt chasing something unrealistic." I looked at her, really looked at her, and something inside me softened. "I know," I said gently. "You were scared for me, but being afraid isn't an excuse for being unkind." She lowered her eyes, tears glimmering under the chandelier light. I leaned forward slightly, folding my hands on the table. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I came because I hoped maybe we could start over. But if we do, there have to be conditions." Dad frowned. "Conditions?" "Yes." I took a steady breath. For once in this family, respect won't be optional. I looked at Haley first. "You're smart, but you hide behind sarcasm. Start something of your own. Something real. And when you fail, because everyone fails, remember it doesn't make you less." Then at Mom, "You deserve more than silence. Stop apologizing for taking up space." Finally, my gaze met Dad's. "And you taught me how to fight by trying to break me. I won't hold that against you. But if you want to be in my life, you'll treat me and others as equals. No more belittling dreams. No more turning love into leverage." The words hung there, not angry, not loud, just final. Dad's face crumpled slightly, pride warring with guilt. He nodded once. It wasn't much, but it was something. Mom reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll try, Maddie." "I know," I said softly. "That's all I ever wanted." Beat. Inner narration. That was the moment the power shifted, not because I won an argument, but because I no longer needed to. I didn't need validation, forgiveness, or applause. Just peace. And I finally had it. That night, after the dinner ended and the dishes stopped clinking, I drove back to my apartment in the city. The skyline shimmered against the dark, glass towers glowing like distant promises I had already kept. I slipped off my heels at the door, letting the quiet hum of the city fill the room. The kind of quiet I used to beg for when I lived under my father's roof. A quiet that didn't mean fear, but peace. I walked to my desk and opened the top drawer. Inside was Grandma Rose's old silver pen. The engraving was almost gone now, worn smooth by years of use and tears. I picked it up, feeling the weight of it in my hand. That pen had written every speech that built my career. Every campaign promise. Every no I turned into a yes. It had written my survival story, in ink and in silence. I sat down, turned on a small lamp, and opened a fresh notebook. For a long moment, I just stared at the blank page. Then I wrote the first words that came to me. They said I was nothing. I paused, remembering Dad's dismissive tone, Haley's laughter, Mom's silence. And then, Grandma's gentle voice. They'll call you soft until you prove that softness is strength. I smiled, the kind that reaches your heart before your lips. The city lights flickered against the window, as if nodding in agreement. I kept writing, not as a senator, not as someone who'd finally made it, but as the girl who had once stood on a freezing porch, clutching a pen and a promise. A girl who refused to let anyone else define her worth. The next morning, I received a message from Mom. Just one line. We're proud of you, Maddie. Truly. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't need to. Some things are better felt than spoken. I placed Grandma's pen back in its drawer, closed it gently, and whispered into the quiet. I hope you're watching, Grandma. You were right. Soft inhale, voiceover lowers, tender but resolute. They said I was nothing. But nothing became the fire that built everything. And now they'll never forget my name.